Welcome to the Catalyst Sale Podcast with Mike and Mike. Sales is a thinking process. This podcast will help you learn about what works in sales, how to hone your skills, and increase your success. I'm your host, Jody Mayberry, and I'm so pleased to tell you that Mike Connor is back with us today. Mike, we always miss you when you're gone.
That's questionable. I'm not sure if that's true or not.
Jody must have a mouse in his pocket because I don't miss him.
You set him up to say that. And thank you, Mike. And thank you, Jody. It's great to be back.
Well, it is great to have you. And we've had such good feedback from the episodes where we have guests, and you two keep finding new people to talk to that add so much value to the show. Our guest today is Ira Bernstein. And Mike Connor, tell us, who is Ira and how did you find him?
So, funny. Well, I don't know how funny it is, but a good lesson in why it's important to stay in touch with people and make connections. And over time, you just never know where your paths will cross. But I actually met Ira through an introduction. It had to have been a year ago or more. And Ira was working for a company that we were actually prospecting into on behalf of one of our clients. So it was a project that we had just kicked off. Ira was lucky enough to fall under the demographic of an ideal purchaser of said solution. I was introduced to him by somebody that used to work for me previously. Long story short, we didn't really talk a whole lot during that time. He ended up leaving that company. I went about my business, but then we crossed paths again when the Sales Enablement Society was launched here in Phoenix. And it was just a way to reconnect. So we go back a little ways. And then since joining the Sales Enablement Society chapter here in Arizona, he and I, along with Mike, have really gotten to know what we do, what he does with his practice. And we just thought it would be a great opportunity to talk about a topic that I think is near and dear to a lot of our hearts, which is properly onboarding people into an organization. And obviously, we talk about sales organizations. I think Ira does work beyond that, but I'll let him describe that. But that's where we met, and really looking forward to talking about this super important topic.
Well, that's a great introduction. Thanks for joining us, Ira.
Great to be here. Thanks for having me, guys.
Yeah, I had a chance to meet Ira at that sales enablement meeting that Mike was talking about. Ira sat over in the back of the room, and I kind of hung out over in my own corner. But since then, we've had a chance to talk about what his business does, and he's with Rampt, or the name of the company is Rampt, and they help organizations like the ones we work with build out their onboarding programs. And in today's conversation, we really want to focus on why onboarding is important. What are some of the common mistakes that organizations make? What are some tips, tricks, ideas that they should consider as they build out this capability inside their organization, and share some best practices with the community?
Looking forward to the conversation, Mike.
So, Ira, how do you want to get started?
Well, why don't I tell you a little bit about how Rampt got started and give you an idea of kind of where onboarding fits within that world.
That would be awesome.
All right. So Rampt really began based off of a number of conversations with sales VPs and startups. And they were typically in the A round and B round phase. And really, I was trying to build my own consulting practice. And my background is 10 years of professional sales and about 5 or 6 in sales enablement. And I knew there was a lot to offer, but didn't quite know how to package that, how to productize that, how to monetize that.
Yep.
And in talking to those VPs, one thing I realized is there becomes a moment in a couple different stages of the company where they need to scale, where scale is important.
Sure.
And at their first moment of scale, which is usually getting that B round of sorts, you're going to go from 5 to 10 employees that are selling to 2, 3, 4x that in probably a period of 6 to 12 months.
Okay.
And essentially, that becomes the point when onboarding is either eerily apparent that it doesn't exist, or is obvious when people walk in that the company is ready to get them up to speed and selling as quickly and efficiently as possible.
So I know on our side, and we're early stage, we've got a couple of documents, we've got some paperwork. The CFO worries about that stuff, the I-9, the W-9, any of the other kind of stuff. I don't get into those details. But is that what you're talking about?
Yeah, it's a good clarification here. So I would take it beyond the first half of day one. So just like you said, all of that work needs to be done. The paperwork filled out. Here's your benefits. Here's your laptop. Here's what you need to know the minimum viable you need to know to be an employee. But when you're a sales rep after that, there's a lot of things that need to happen. First of all, they need to be able to sell a product or service. Well, if you don't know about it, what it does, how it works, the people that are going to buy it or that have a need for it, what problems are you actually solving? Who are you competing with? All those things, the actual history of the company. How did this product company get started? Where were they? Where are they now? And where are they going? All of those things are critical to really getting started in any organization as a sales professional.
Sure.
So that's what I spend most of my time focusing on, is really helping those first couple weeks that a sales rep gets started.
So what are most of those organizations doing today before you get involved?
It's what I like to call the onboarding Trello board, right?
The onboarding Trello board. So it's just like sticky notes up against a wall.
Yeah.
Yep.
I mean, essentially, I've found that one of two things happens. Either they have a lot of documents that have been created ad hoc when there was a need, right? Just kind of the world of startup. It doesn't get focused on unless it needs to get done.
As needed, on demand. Yep.
Bingo. So it either goes into a Google Drive folder, or someone says, you know what, we have now enough content that we should probably put some organization to it. So instead of it being in a Google Drive folder, it's the same content, which is typically docs, instruction sheets, process documents, and put it in a Trello board. Day 1 here, day 2 here. Check off that it's done. But there's no interactivity. Right? It's basically you're getting a homework assignment for the next 2 weeks.
Right. I remember the last company I worked for when I started, I got a 3-ring binder with a bunch of like file spaces in it that organized information by product, it organized information by customer, it organized information by a number of different things. And I don't think I cracked that 3-ring binder open after the initial onboarding.
Yep.
Yet I lugged it home on an airplane, and then it sat in the corner of an office, and finally was exited out of the house right around my exit.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's something that's pretty common. So essentially, the Trello board, it's the digital innovative version of that same thing, which is, again, short lifespan, and you got to ask yourself, what is the actual outcomes that you're getting out of that type of process to get people up and running?
So how do you measure that? You talk about outcomes, and then I start thinking about measurements. How do you measure that?
Every company has their own view of it. But again, when you're thinking about onboarding from a sales perspective, I think about Rampt-based metrics, new hire metrics. Things that are very common are time to first deal. I was actually at a conference a couple months ago that someone suggested time to second deal is actually more important, because in our world, we all know that the bluebirds happen, right? So you may get lucky the first time, but the second time is pretty good in terms of consistency.
Sure.
Time to quota. How quickly do they hit their ramp numbers? Whatever it is, as you've talked about in your podcast before, it's focusing on one or two of those things and then using that as the test to see, are we doing better? Are we doing worse? What do we need to tweak?
So when I think of my onboarding experience, some common practices that I know we were guilty of, and you mentioned you work with early stage companies and startups, but we weren't a startup, or we were a 10-year-old company, and it was still a pain point for us when we would onboard a rep or multiple reps at the same time. And when I think back, what were the things that we had gaps with? One, there was usually a common language that we would speak with acronyms and things that were appropriate for our industry or our company that people had never heard of before, and we'd always take that for granted.
Yep.
So we'd fix that by putting together basically an acronym workbook. The second was the knowledge transfer, the product training. You mentioned the binder. I have that same binder. And the problem with it was a lot of it was outdated. I actually did read the whole binder, and it was really outdated. And
I call BS.
I was just trying to get a rise out of you. I did thumb through it, but what I recognized was that we never used it during the training, which I found kind of interesting. It was like a souvenir or a trophy for attending, but we didn't use it. And so then I thought, okay, how valuable is the information in this binder? If you're not going to actually use it,
right?
Is it outdated?
Yep.
And then we would fill the gap by once we got back, or once we had the operation up and running, I used the buddy system. So it was basically, hey, there's a new rep coming in, pair them up with another person that's already on the team that has some experience, let them kind of figure things out for a week or two, and then kind of throw them to the wolves. And that was pretty much the extent of it. I'm just wondering if that's what you still see, and because I don't think it's just startups. I think it's just any company that has this challenge.
You're always onboarding new reps, right? You're always onboarding new people into the organization. You might even be onboarding a new technology, a new process. So yeah, Ira, what are you saying?
All of the above is the reality. I think what has been in the past, when you think about onboarding, what you're just describing, probably a number of people who are listening to this are thinking about I have a new hired group of 5 people. I'm flying them from all around the country to one place. I have them live, have them for 5 days or 10 days, right? That period of time. I'm going to absolutely bombard them with as much information as humanly possible. Why? Because it's the only time I perceive that I'm going to have their full undivided attention. You guys are salespeople like me, right? Once it's gone, the perception is I'm out in the field and I'm closing business. And that's what I'm focused on. Learning and development, it's put to the side. And my opinion is if you change the mindset to a culture of ongoing learning, a couple things happen. First, you realize that you don't need to boil that ocean of information in the first week or two, right?
Right.
This is an ongoing thing.
Yep.
I don't have to shove all the stuff that I normally would in 2 weeks. I could do that in 2 months if I have, as you guys have talked about before, right technology, right process, right people. So that's one. The second thing is once you look at that, then you start thinking about, well, what is it that I want them to know? Just as you would be prospecting to a customer or a client or a prospect, and you're trying to find out what outcomes they're looking for their business, you should look at learning in the same way. So for example, if I'm going to teach them a class, whether it's 20 minutes, an hour, 3 hours, what are they going to walk away being able to do? Can you clearly summarize that? Because when you summarize that and put that in the clear statements, it's very easy to work backwards to figure out, well, if I want them to walk away being able to do X, I need to teach them Y and Z.
So it sounds a lot like designing based on an expected set of outcomes.
Absolutely. And it's having a methodology to just focus on that and actually execute, right? It doesn't have to be the perfect methodology, but the whole point is, do you know what this is going to deliver in terms of an outcome? How do you actually prove that that outcome has been delivered? And then anything that doesn't drive that outcome, take it out.
Yeah. I think one of the things we've struggled with before when onboarding new reps is figuring out what knowledge is actually transferring. Like how much did they really get away with? So you give them the acronym soup document that talks about, in the learning space, it's LMS, it's API, it's whatever. When I was at UPS, we had acronyms for everything, acronyms that I can't even remember. And I'm happy that I'm past that. So how do you test that? Like, how do you determine whether or not knowledge is transferred in the onboarding process?
I think there are a couple places to do it. The first thing I would say before getting into that is be careful what you want them to learn. So to use the example of the acronyms that both of you guys talked about.
Yep.
How often are those acronyms? How often do you want them to use it when they're talking to a prospect? Probably more around internal vernacular.
Sure.
Right?
Yep.
Because once you start talking with those acronyms out to a prospect, you're making an assumption that they know what you're talking about.
Right.
So there's some danger in that. But going to the question there, I think my belief is you first have an assessment. Most people, when they think assessment, they're going to think test. The purpose of an assessment, in my mind, when you're teaching a topic, it should be done right after. And it's really trying to accomplish one goal. Was the person paying attention to what you were actually teaching them that day?
Okay.
So simple. We're not trying to get into the details of it, right? Were they actually paying attention? Because let's be honest, if they weren't paying attention, you want to know that in your first week or two as a manager for that rep. That's a red flag. Okay. So were they paying attention? And then from there, it depends upon the behavior. Sometimes it's best to be able to observe that behavior if they're just on a call, right? Wild discovery of animals, right? How do they perform in nature, right?
Yep.
In the wild.
Yep.
Just listen to them on the calls. Other things may be that it's sitting down on a one-on-one and going through a role play or a team meeting in a role play. Other times it may be, hey, I want you to practice something over and over and over again till it becomes rote. Maybe that's recording yourself on your phone. Maybe that is actually doing it through a conversation or multiple conversations. So there's a lot of different methods to do it. But I do think, going to what you asked, in the end, you need some way to hold the manager accountable or the leader accountable for ensuring that rep has learned what they need to learn.
Awesome.
That's funny you mentioned that, the holding managers accountable. I think that in a past life, when I did in-person training, now we're going back to the 3-ring binder days and not Trello cards, but that is one of the places where things would break down. And I would see this repeatedly, where you would have somebody invest a week of their time in a course tended to bring them on board and also develop their skills. And then the first thing they would hear when they got on the job in the real world was, I know this is all the stuff they trained you, but this is how we really get things done around here. And it just used to frustrate me to no end to really instantly deprogram somebody that was ready to go apply that learning and then immediately be given the instruction that, yeah, I know you just have to sit through that, but just forget that stuff. Let me tell you how it really works. And the challenges and the problems that create for any organization.
It's deflating.
Yeah, absolutely. I think to me, that's nowadays big topic, sales and marketing alignment, right? It's a big topic that everyone's talking about. And in reality, what you're talking about there is a misalignment between the training team or training department or sales enablement and the field leaders.
So sales should be aligned with marketing and vice versa?
Once in a while.
So talk a little bit about that. The training, and a lot of this kind of gets into, we talked about the Sales Enablement Society, and a lot of times we think of this fitting inside the sales organization, inside sales enablement, or could be a sales ops function.
Sure.
So in the organizations that you've worked with and what you're seeing in the marketplace, where does this fit?
Yeah, I think it's one that has multiple places that it can sit depending on the organization itself and how they align. Basically, I think you find it in one of 3 core places in terms of training from that world. Either you have a separate training department. The company has a training department that covers everything.
Yep.
You may have a sales enablement team that L&D rolls up to that sits in marketing, or L&D. And I'm using my acronyms, learning and development.
Sure.
That rolls up into sales. My experience has been almost always that the learning and development of the sales organization rolls up to the final owner in the sales organization.
That's great to hear, because we've been in organizations where it doesn't. And then there's this huge disconnect between L&D, learning and development, and the sales function. Do you see that, or have you had experience with that, or have you seen that before?
For sure. I mean, look, the reality is if I'm in charge of onboarding sales reps and my boss, person who I inevitably, the buck stops there, is the person who is completely impacted by the onboarding of those reps, it's going to be much different than if I really report to the person who's in charge of human resources.
How important is it for someone in that L&D role, that learning and development role, or this training role? How important is it for them to have experienced selling?
Sorry, I have this smile on my face and probably steam coming out of my ears as I just think about it. I think it's critical. Since I started selling, the term carrying the bag, and a little bit of the people don't understand what selling is about until you've actually carried the bag. So you've actually had a quota sitting on your shoulders to the point where 50% or more of your income is reliant on how you perform you yourself. That's something that I believe is impossible to teach. You need to experience it.
So how about with job shadowing? Can you get part of the way there through some job shadowing?
I think what that does is it allows you to better craft the training itself to the behaviors that you see and observe.
Okay.
But it's the difference between sympathy and empathy. I mean, I think in its truest definition, right? I think part of one of the reasons why I'm good at what I do is because I'm always keeping a lens of, man, when I was a sales rep, I just need to know what I need to know. And the 80% of other stuff that's typically in the training class, just remove it. And a couple things will happen. 1, I'm going to be appreciative. 2, I'm going to learn it because it's just what I need to know. And 3, I'm going to come back for more because I know they were being respectful of my time.
So you're saying the sales reps don't really care about Kirkpatrick models and all of that kind of stuff?
They want the shortest distance and effort from point A to point B so they can get from point A to point B as often as possible, as effectively as possible, so that they can not just meet their goals, but exceed their goals.
Yep.
And so when you think about it, if your focus isn't that end result that the salesperson's end result is, you're misaligned, 1. And 2, you don't realize or think about the fact that 2-week training, 3-week training, or whatever it is, making it shorter may actually be better.
So let's build upon that. So this idea of kind of taking things down to the studs and really delivering the minimal amount of information necessary. If I'm a training person, now what I'm thinking is, how much do you really need me to do? Like I would deliver this amazing 3-ring binder, and I could clearly walk into my boss's office and say, here's what I'm delivering. Now what you're saying is make it smaller, and maybe you're taking away what I perceive the value that I'm delivering to the sales organization. Help me kind of understand that and come to grips with the idea that I should be more focused on the outcome, not the delivery mechanism.
Well, I would say you need to think about what is the goal of the training. If the goal isn't to improve the results of the people that you're training, their productivity, their effectiveness, there's misalignment. And to be quite frank, it's not valuable. It's taking people's time for the sake of taking people's time so that you can say, I have a 3-ring binder of 2 weeks worth of stuff. I think in our world, we think about results and outcomes. And the way to do that is making it effective and efficient. People getting out of it what they need to get out of it and doing it in as little time as is necessary. I really do believe a less is more because people appreciate it.
Yep.
People value it.
Yep. So let's talk about general best practices. So like what are some of the things that you should always keep in mind when going down this route?
Yeah. So I think when you want to look at the onboarding program from a timeline perspective of, okay, at the end of week 1 or 2, or what that core onboarding experience, those first couple of weeks are going to be like, what are the things that they need to know that you can observe and assess? What are the things you want them to be able to do that you can see and assess? And write those down, right? Really get down to it and write them in. Those things should be 1 to 2 sentences, each of them. Okay. That may be 5 things and maybe 10 things and maybe 20 things for all you know. But bottom line is, it also lets everyone in the group and that's working on this know these are the expectations. Because my guess is a large percentage of the time, that's where the misalignment happens. There's never that conversation of what are they supposed to walk out with? Okay. Once you do that, then you take each of those sentences, those 1 to 2 sentences, and kind of figure out, can some of them be combined into a class, or are they actually separate classes, separate concept, a separate topic? And once you take each of those sentences, you really break that down into many outcomes that may need to build up to achieving that goal.
Okay.
That's really how you start a class. And then once you have those 2 or 3 things for that topic that you're going to teach, everything you create, your litmus test is, did it tie to those 2 or 3 things? I call them learning outcomes.
Sure.
Right?
Yep.
If it's not tying to that, you're going the wrong direction.
Yep.
If it ties to it, you're going the right direction. And to some extent, it's just that simple.
So how has the technology changed in this space?
Well, I mean, think about Mr. Connor and his description of the 3-ring binder. And you had the 3-ring binder, right? It was paper, it was live, it was in person.
So Ira, how has the technology changed since you've been in this space?
Yeah, I mean, I think about 6 or 7 years ago when I created my first certification program for a sales organization, and I had to get videos put into an LMS or learning management system. It had to be SCORM compliant. So let's add another acronym to it. And it was very, very rigid. There were a lot of rules just to get a video I made consumable by a human being.
Yep.
And so now technology just makes it easier to take any type of video or audio recording and make it accessible.
Yep.
Make it consumable.
Okay.
So that concept of providing a platform for on-demand learning, I think, is a huge thing with technology right now. Okay. So making it easy to get access whenever you want. 2 is the mobile component. So in that anywhere piece is, I talk to a lot of companies in Boston and San Francisco, and I always think about when they're going into the city to work, they're coming on a subway on their way in and on their way out. What if they could spend some of their time actually consuming good information that's just easy?
It's one of the reasons why we've chosen podcasting, because you can have it going on while you're in the car, or you can have it going while you're in the train, or you can have it while you're falling asleep on an airplane.
Yeah, for sure. And then the other piece is really making it peer-based. So that learning can be shared amongst the team, amongst the organization. And all of those things provide a number of things that people don't really, people really want to keep that live, that in-person feel. It feels comfortable, warm. You're warming people up to the culture. But the reality is what you lose sometimes is consistency. So by having certain, if not a majority of courses and topics done on demand, ensures that every person who walks into your organization is taught the same concepts, the same ways. I mean, think about it. If you were learning how to play golf and you learned from lesson 1 to lesson 20, and there was 4 different scenarios, and each of the scenarios is a person's getting taught by a different pro, they're going to end up in a different place.
I think you just hit the nail on the head on why my golf game is so bad.
That consistency point I think is so important, and it's lost by a lot of people. There's the feeling that that's impersonal, but in actuality, you're giving people who want to learn the mechanisms in which they want to consume that information.
Well, I can't remember the last time I said I was excited to go to a course or excited to go to an event that was going to take 2 days and it was going to be a lot of training. I think of when I want to do, Connor's going to laugh here, when I want to do work on my Jeep, which really means I just change the air filter, but I go to YouTube, I search and I find it. And that's a quick way for me to get and consume information. It seems like you're saying that you can leverage that technology to make your onboarding program better, faster.
Absolutely. YouTube may not be the best actual medium, but that concept is absolutely true.
Sure.
Bite-sized chunks.
It's also not the best place to find repair videos on your Jeep. Just saying.
I'm waiting for the zinger here.
Connor, you know that when I go to do repair on my Jeep, it's usually at the dealership.
I do know that to be a fact, because then he calls me from the dealership and with a picture of said impending repair and says, "Are they screwing me over right now, or is this for real?" And so it's an instant feedback loop from a peer that helps him learn what he's getting himself into. So I see the point.
I think this whole concept, though, of process and technology is really important because things have really evolved in the last 6 or 7 years and even beyond. And the whole idea is this: with any concept, make it accessible, make it easy to learn through different types of modalities. So
sure.
That's hearing, seeing, and also doing, right? So you don't want to just have nothing but on-demand content, but then how do you have them do small little things to reinforce that learning?
Yep.
Right? That's really, really important. And it's just like anything else. As we as culture, as a society, start learning about better ways to get from point A to point B, oftentimes that means that it takes less time to do it. That may not look good for me if I'm a trainer and it's my job. And wow, that what took me 40 hours a week may only take me 20. But I look at it from maybe a different point of view, which is what could I do with those other 20 hours that could actually contribute to the sales reps and their production.
Awesome. I think one of the things that I noticed when you've shown me some of the technology that you use, I really like how there are scheduled points, guideposts, what we might call them inside and when we think about it in the context of a sales process, but there are scheduled points where you expect there to be interaction. And those scheduled points aren't on a weekly basis or a monthly basis, they're on a daily basis. So there's this constant reinforcement early on in the process. And then over time, those posts might be moved out a little bit further so that they continue to stay engaged. Is that by design?
Absolutely. The common feedback from statistics and from sales organizations that we all read is people lose 85% of what they learn by the time they walk out of a class, and then it's not reinforced for the rest of the year till the next year they invest the money in the sales training, right? And in reality, if you flip that on its head a little bit and say smaller chunks over time, with those smaller chunks, you can invest a small amount of time. And we're talking 5-10 minutes to essentially say, tell me what you learned, or show me that you learned what we hoped for you to learn. Show it in what you actually do. That may be recording. That may be a live role play. That may be listening to a call, to calls that they're doing. But the bottom line is you can get that more holistic view, 360 view of their learning if you spend less time in the classroom.
Well, this has been extremely useful, Ira. I know this is something that every organization, I will even say, struggles with, or is at least concerned about, because as you bring new people on, what do you do is an easy question or a hard question, depending on how you look at it, because it's difficult in every circumstance. But when it's a sales professional you're bringing on, It's hard to slow down to show the ropes. So I really appreciate what you're doing.
Thank you. The good thing is I love what I do. It's a lot of fun. I think that just as you said, there's a lot of need. That's I think as you said, to slow down to speed up. And what happens is when companies are in that scaling moment, when they're bringing in their first new hire class that has more than one person, the impact on the organization, the entire organization, there's so much more risk that goes along with that new hire class. You're not just messing up or making successful one new hire. You may be making or messing up the next quarter or 2 quarters for that matter, or getting to that 3x growth that you planned on hitting so that you can get your next series. We spend and invest a lot of money on hiring those people. And then once they get there, we just assume we can figure it out.
That's wonderful. I know people are going to want to find out more about you and your company and how they can continue to learn more. Can you point us in the right direction?
Sure. It's ramptconsulting.com, Rampt with a T. Ira at ramptconsulting.com is my email address.
And we'll add notes into the show notes. We'll have links to Ira's site and some of the work that he's done. And you know, as always, we appreciate questions that the audience asks. Any recommendations that you have on guests that you'd like to have on the show, people that you know that are in this space that can provide value back out to the sales community is really important to us. So Ira, thanks for spending the time with us today. And this was a great conversation.
It's been my pleasure. I enjoyed it.
All right. Thank you so much, Ira. And thank you for listening to the Catalyst Sale Podcast.